Hello YouTube, Dave here again. Yesterday I received in the mail my copy of B1 In Search of the Unknown. Now, I haven't had enough time to sit down and really thoroughly read it enough that I feel comfortable doing a full review, but as I've gone through and kind of read this module, it's really got me thinking that, the framework that this adventure uses might be a great way to help new dungeon masters if Wizards of the Coast ever decides to reincarnate their starter set. So just a little bit of a background on this adventure. It is meant to be an introductory adventure, meaning that it is really geared towards beginning dungeon masters. It even actually has introductory module right on the top of the corner of the cover. This was released with the Holmes version of D&D Basic, which was not its own separate product line. Like we know the Moldvay D&D or the Menser D&D, which became the D&D Rule Cyclopedia, was its own sort of separate product line. This was more or less, the Holmes version was a way to sort of simplify the D&D original set, which had like the Men and Magic, Wilderness Adventures, and Monsters and Treasure, I think were the names of the first three books. So it just took those and sort of condensed the rules and tried to make them a little bit more simplistic to read and understand before steering people towards Advanced Dungeons & Dragons First Edition. Well, so what's really cool about this adventure is it's really just a framework. It's something that, the Dungeon Master is going to need to put a little bit of time into, but it spends the first like 8 pages just talking about ways to be an effective dungeon master, stocking your dungeon, things to keep in mind when doing that, ways to, abdicate the rules, stuff like that. It's a really, really cool resource, and I like it quite a bit. The dungeon itself is, fully designed, as you can see the map on the back here, and every single room has a description, has like all the descriptive text and everything already worked out. The only thing that the rooms and the dungeons don't have are things to populate it. So there's near the end of the book, or at the end of each of the sections, or at the beginning of each of the sections, because like I said, I've only sort of had a chance to flip through it a little bit. There's a list of monsters as well as a list of treasure. And the idea is that as the dungeon master, you have to go through and fill the rooms. Now, not all the rooms are going to have something. In fact, I'm pretty sure it mentions that you shouldn't try to fill every single room with something. Sometimes a room is just simply empty. But as you can see sort of here, it's got a blank spot at the top of each of the rooms for monsters and treasure. So if you decide to actually have something populate that room, it could be monster, it could be a treasure, which if it's a treasure, the book does say you really should try to make sure that it's hidden or not easy to find. And sometimes you're going to have a monster guarding treasure. It could be their own personal treasure hoard, or it could just be incidental that there are creatures in this room and then that there's still a hidden treasure along with it. So this adventure, the premise behind it is pretty simple. The player characters go to investigate a former stronghold that was developed or built by a pair of adventurers. They don't know necessarily a whole lot about the adventurers. They have a chance to learn a few legends or rumors, which are included in the book, some of which are going to be true and some of which are going to be false. The characters have no way of knowing which one's which, though. The adventurers that created the stronghold have long since abandoned it, and now it's been sort of overrun by monsters. And it's also kind of an interesting concept to think about because when it comes to dungeons, a lot of times I think nowadays it's really easy to want to build the dungeon for the creatures that you have inhabiting it, instead of having the dungeon area that they explore. And dungeon may not necessarily be the best term. It could be a stronghold, cathedral, ruins, things like that. You could try designing them to be based off of some sort of previous occupants that no longer exist or have long since abandoned it, and see how these other creatures sort of repurpose things. So I think it's something that, is kind of an interesting idea that I don't think necessarily is always in the minds of dungeon masters when they look to design adventure locations. So the reason that I think that this is such a great idea is because it's something that's designed to get dungeon masters thinking about how they want their dungeon to be laid out. The hard work is already done, which is something that I think is important for a product that is meant to be an introductory module. So the whole point is that this is going to be likely a beginning adventure for new dungeon masters, players, etc. With that in mind, the dungeon itself is the map is fully drawn, the rooms are fully fleshed out in terms of what's in them as far as dressing is concerned. But it's up to the dungeon master to, look at some monsters that would be appropriate for, the levels of the players going through. And it gives you that whole list of monsters, and it's just like, okay, this would be a great room for the goblins to be in. And, well, because goblins are in this area, or in this room, they would probably also logically control the rooms sort of around it. And you kind of go from there. And then you might have it that there's a more powerful force, like maybe the goblins are in the northeastern corner, and there's like a group of ghouls or something in the southwestern corner that the goblins want to stay as far away from as possible. It just kind of gets you thinking along those lines. And that's where I want to kind of talk about the idea of using this in a brand new 5th edition starter set. The reason I think it's such a great idea is because it's, again, something that gets you thinking. It's something that gets the dungeon master used to something that is very important when it comes to running D&D games long term: prep time. And with a lot of these starter sets, the goal is to simply say, pick up the book and you can start right away. Now, with adventures like In Search of the Unknown, you can't do that. You can't just pull it off the shelf and say, I want to run this, so let's roll some dice. You have to spend some time thinking about how you want to lay out the dungeon. But again, a starter set really shouldn't just be about introducing the overall rules for everyone to understand. It should also try to incorporate a bit more dungeon design into their product. And having a dungeon laid out with the rooms already described, and just saying, as the dungeon master, you now have to pick which monsters are going to be in which areas, and which treasures are going to be in which areas. Things along those lines. And then you could have, now with B1, it's really just encounters with monsters, and then you explore all the rooms and you're done. Which is fine because it's for, low-level characters, and really, low-level characters shouldn't have too much of a problem just wanting to explore a dungeon to find treasures and start to make a name for themselves as these, dungeon crawling explorers kind of idea. But if you want to have a more modern idea of having, a big boss controlling everything, what you could do is have actually like a list of separate potential storylines. And again, you make the dungeon simple enough that you can easily have it moldable to these situations. Have, maybe like a 20 room to 25 room dungeon. And just say, if you want to use this story, which has this guy as, the main antagonist, then these are the kind of subordinates that they have. For example, it could be like, an ogre that has a horde of goblins that are harassing, a nearby village. So the player characters go to try to deal with these goblins and ultimately try to defeat this ogre. You could also have it that the townsfolk are nervous because a necromancer has moved into this location and has this whole host of undead creatures that he's creating. Now, he hasn't necessarily done anything hostile yet, but there's enough fear there and enough paranoia that the local lord petitions a group of heroes to go deal with this necromancer. You could have a group of orcs or kobolds. There's, all these different possibilities that you could do. And, again, you have sort of your boss creature, and you have your obvious sort of boss room that you would say, even as a starting point, it's like, okay, well, this is like a big throne room type of thing. So my main villain's going to be in here. And then just kind of work your way out from there. But it would make it a very modular experience, and something that you can get a lot of use out of. For example, the same dungeon master, if he has multiple groups, for example, or wants to run for multiple groups, or a few years down the line picks up a new group of players, you can run that same adventure, but do something different with it and have a different list of villains and encounters, and you pull them straight from the monster manual, with maybe the exception of the final boss kind of thing. I mean, the ogre would be just an ogre at the end of the dungeon. The necromancer would probably be along the lines of the evil wizard from the starter set that we currently have, and you just kind of go from there. But I think having that in there is something that's going to get the Dungeon Master thinking. And the starter set, again, aside from just being these are the basic concept of the rules that you can learn, now go out and buy all the, the big expensive books, it should be along the lines of helping the players understand the mechanics of their characters and the combat system and things along those lines, but should also really kind of try to focus on getting the Dungeon Master more involved in the design elements of the adventure itself. You could even have a section at the end where you have it sort of be maybe open-ended and have the Dungeon Master, design their own dungeon using some of these ideas that you present in this particular adventure and have some guidelines for developing your own dungeon. And I think that would be a starter set that would be really worth having. But what do you guys think? Do you think that is something that can be done in this day and age? Can you produce a low-level module where, everything's done except for populating the dungeon and leave that up to the Dungeon Master with obviously with some guidelines in place? Do you think it's something that Wizards of the Coast should actually think about and try to use this as a way of promoting dungeon masters, young dungeon masters, to create their own scenarios and dungeons and etc. Let me know what you guys think. I think it's a really cool idea, and I'd like to see it, but I don't honestly know how likely it is to happen. But I think it would be a really cool idea. So let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Thank you guys very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and we will see you next time. Take care. Funding for this channel is provided by my awesome supporters over on Patreon. So everyone who has donated to that, from the bottom of my heart, thank you very much. Even $1 a month helps immensely, and without your guys' support, this channel would not be possible. I want to provide special thanks to Kennedy S., David L., Will W., Michael L., The Twisted Tentacle Inn, and Roll Stats for their generous donations. Thank you again to everyone who's contributed, and all of you make this possible.